So I will say security. I was really nervous because leaving for an international flight from the United States is always kind of a pain in the butt, right? Because of the way security deals and all that sort of stuff. Canadian international security was such a pleasant time, all things considered, except they all thought I was French. Every last one of them thought I was French. So I would walk up and they're saying hello to every other white person approaching them, and then I come up and they're like bonjour, like just sweat. And I was like, I know I look like John Baptiste Arbin, but I do not parler the français.
That's amazing.
It was clockwork every single time. But hey, speaking of Canada, so we're joined by Raquel Samayoa. How you doing?
Good morning, everyone. And it's Samayoa. It's a lot of vowels, I know.
Oh well, and I speak American. I speak it good. So for the two people who don't know who you are, do you mind giving us like a quick list of all the things you're doing?
Sure. So my name's Raquel Samayoa. I teach trumpet at the University of North Texas. I also co-direct the brass band at North Texas with David Childs. I play in Lantana Trio, which is a brass trio, which is comprised of UNT faculty as well. I'm really into chamber, so I play in a Seraph brass quintet, Seraph brass quintet, and I guess that's the quick rundown about me.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in our audience knows where UNT is, or who David Childs is. Just oblivious to those things. But we just got off. We were just hanging out at the Great Canadian Brass Band Festival. We got to adjudicate a little bit of that. We did solo and ensemble, and then we did bands the following night. And that whole thing was run by Anita. I mean, last name is McAllister, right? Anita McAllister.
Yeah, Anita McAllister.
And I tell you all what, I've never seen an event go on for the first time so well. Like,
Anita's really top notch. She's top notch.
And the whole staff was phenomenal and super willing to help, at least from what I saw, but they had to be nice to us. What are they going to do? Be mean to the adjudicators?
So how did this come about? Do we know how, you said this was in the first year. Who was behind it? Do we know?
Well, I think Anita is the mastermind of all this. I was there in January with Seraph Brass at the University of Toronto, and she was telling me about this brass band festival she was planning to do in May, and if I would be interested in adjudicating, she might reach out to me later. And she was telling me about all the work that she was doing. She was concerned that it wouldn't get a lot of attention, a lot of bands wouldn't go. So I knew even in January she was all over it at that point. So I think she was the mastermind on that.
Yeah, Anita was, and Hannaford had hosted brass band events like that in the past, but it's been a while because there's been, spotty interest from Canadian bands to go to it. But after the pandemic and everything with NABA's championships being so far away from Canada, I think the bands are kind of starving for something to do up there. So Anita jumped in and put together the event so that there'd be something for those bands up there. And of course, NABA, jumped in and threw some financial support there to help get it back going. So, so that the Canadians, who are a part of the North American Brass Band Association, despite the fact that it's, sometimes doesn't seem that way because there's so many American bands that are involved in it. But it was a great thing. I look forward to hearing all about it because I haven't heard any news about it as of yet.
Well, there are a total of
it's up to you.
8 bands, I think, in total. We had 8 bands. And it's very interesting. I mean, it was for an entertainment contest, though. I think that's a nice full day. I mean, we're going, 10 to 5 with a break. And that was without Hannaford because Hannaford did the big gala concert at the end. And they had Gary Curtin come in and solo with Hannaford. And then they premiered a piece, right?
I think a couple pieces, 2 pieces.
I should know. I sat in the reading band because Rob Vollen told me to.
That was hilarious, by the way. You sent me like a picture. It was, remind me who it was. It was you.
Was it Robert Miller and Gary Curtin and
Yeah,
you and some high school kid?
and there was a high school kid on the end. Yeah, that was
they put him on first.
Yep, absolutely.
That was amazing.
And it was funny too. Like I used the whole like I'm not gonna bring my instrument excuse to like not have to play that weekend.
Yeah.
And then Rob's like, "Oh yeah, are you playing in the reading band?" I was like, "Nope, I don't have a horn." And then Rob goes and like runs off and finds some instrument for me to play. And so I'm sitting there next to Gary Curtin, trying my best to survive on this thing because like it and I did not agree. And I had
was
never
it a Yamaha or 321 or
no, it wasn't a 321. I'll say that much. Thank goodness it was a compensating instrument. But I'm sitting there next to Gary Curtin and his tribal tattoo Adam's euphonium. And then Rob, who's on his main axe, and then like this is the first time either of them have heard me play in person, and I'm just like, oh, what button do I don't know? Like I just on top of like being like I would say that that piece would be like a good second section test piece kind of like ish level, and and also another star, especially in the wind band world, Cynthia Johnson Turner was like the guest conductor for all that, and so I'm like, she's right there, I can, it's euphonium, so I'm just the bed while Cynthia Johnson Turner's there, so it was great. It was a fun time.
What kind of music did they read in the reading session?
Oh, they had two pieces that I think were commissioned by people who were involved in the other bands. They were like composers. I think Marcus Venables is the name, was a composer in residence. And it was like that, but it wasn't like Whit Friday marches or anything like that. It was music. it was rough. Well, it was hard to read. It wasn't necessarily easy, and especially with like an army of cornets and everything like that. I think it overall went really well during the main concert. I don't know, we were backstage.
It sounded great. The thing I liked about the Great Canadian, I always want to say Great American Brass Band, Great Canadian, is that we didn't rank the bands as adjudicators. We just gave out prizes, section prizes, which I thought was kind of neat. Maybe for the first year, that's maybe more appropriate, because there was a big divide in talent, I would say.
It was also it was interesting, the mentality of the bands around that, because if you would have done that with like the Great American Brass Band Festival, for instance, if you would have said we're not going to have a grand champion or anything like that, I feel like a lot of the American bands would be like, oh, well, we're not going to go if we can't like win something. I feel like that's kind of an attitude here. Whereas like a lot of the Canadian bands just wanted to go for comments in general. Like they weren't really particularly interested, or at least what they were showing was they weren't particularly interested in necessarily becoming a grand champion or like working through that sort of a situation.
There was definitely an educational focus for that, and Mid-Atlantic was the same way as well, where they weren't really trying to place the bands in an order or anything, where they just wanted to get comments from the expert judges and improve and just be in that community of brass bands, which is, I think great, it's perfectly fine.
That's why the Mid-Atlantic Brass Band Festival got started, because we used to bring in guest conductors to kind of work clinics with Atlantic, and then when the other bands started bringing in their guest artists to kind of work with them, and then we figured, wait a second, we're all really pretty close to each other. What if we all just came together and then just shared these people, and we could all play for them, and then divvy up the time, with that feedback equally. And so Mid-Atlantic Brass Band Festival kind of came out of trying to get that feedback just a little bit before NABA to do the final push. So I think that especially with an entertainment competition, I think that not having placement having like overall placement is good, because it gets a little bit like, you have these bands that are so spaced out and everyone can be vastly different performance levels and stuff, but everyone can get that feedback in some form, everyone has something that they can achieve on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, excuse me. I'm not part of NABA. I've been kind of out of it a little bit, but it seems that the brass band genre is really taken off in North America. It has been for, I think, a while. And I wonder, these community players that are mostly comprised, these brass bands, if they really like the competitive aspect of it, in addition to performing, because there's a lot of wind bands as well. But I really see that they like the competition aspect, like Aaron was saying, in America. Maybe we're just more competitive, or we just need purpose. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's about necessarily as being competitive. I think, at the end of the day, everyone that wins loves to win. But I think that what drives most Americans in the brass band movement is, one, is playing more advanced literature, and then trying to play it at the highest level of proficiency that they can get themselves to do it. It's about striving for excellence in musicianship. That's not to say that you can't do that, on a Pops concert playing the Cowboys or Superman or something like that. It's just that, when you spend 3-4 months trying to play a master work for the brass band at the highest levels that you could possibly get for the group of people that you have in the room, that translates to Superman and the Cowboys year round. So I think I think it's more of an internal satisfaction. I think it's the same way in England as well, or all over the world, where those top brass bands, they like the competition part of it. And I don't think it's as much for the win as it is for the satisfaction of playing the great music at the highest levels.
It did make the adjudication very interesting, because we were still picking like best sections, and then there was a march competition involved in the whole thing. But it also made it really nice, because for the most part we did everything. All of our comments for the brass band competition were verbal, right? So they were all recorded comments. We didn't do any handwritten ones. So it was actually nice to, I feel like when you're adjudicating sometimes, like I feel like, because we did paper on the solo day, other than the person walking out to like take their bow and get their solo started, I didn't get to watch them perform. I just listened and wrote like crazy. So it was nice to like sit back and watch the program and just kind of talk a little bit and have the scores and all that sort of a thing. And then, but it did make things interesting, because I'm like, is what I'm saying helpful in any situation? Because I'm not looking for like, and I just feel like it's like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But the spirit of everything is not to do that, necessarily.
I remember, I think we had 25, everybody played for 25 minutes, and we'd have like 10, 15-minute break. I'd stop and Aaron would go on for 2 more minutes after the band start playing. And I was like, oh, he is giving them some good stuff.
Or stuff. Let's not quantify it in any way, shape, or form. I literally ended just about every tape going, I hope my lunatic ramblings are helpful in any way, shape, or form. Like, I literally was just like thinking that way.
They were probably entertaining, if nothing else.
Well, there was some points with Weston Silver specifically where they just did some things and I made jokes out of it. Like I was making fun of there was like they did a big drum featured section, and they had like 4 tom drums come up to the front, and they did this very like blast-esque little show of it all. And I was just like, yep, we need more toms. There's not enough toms. We need more toms. Oh, the cornets are standing up. I'm about to be assaulted by them. Oh, now you're coming out. And then they did the whole thing where they came out into the audience, and they did the whole like, so I was making fun of them for being like every Broadway musical in the 2000s where it's like, oh, they're in the audience. So yeah, maybe we'll see. If I'm not invited back ever again, we'll know why.
It definitely felt like marching band adjudication. I don't know if y'all ever done any of that, but I have, and it was very much that. I kind of like that more so than the writing. At first, I was intimidated because I was like, I don't know what to say. Balance blend. How much can I say about that? But there was a lot actually to say. It was interesting. I enjoyed it.
What kind of strategies were there into building their show? Like we heard about, you just said Weston, Aaron. They kind of brought people up to the front. They put people in the audience. What other things did the bands do that you found interesting?
Well, it seemed like Weston, because they had the experience of doing it with they had the experience of doing that with the entertainment contest. Which one was that? Was it Great American?
No, they did the U.S. Open.
U.S. Open, thank you.
Yeah, I judged them at the U.S. Open.
Yeah,
did they do the same program?
Maybe. I don't think copy and paste, but they did some of the same things. I think is what
some concept.
Scottish.
They did. Did they do Gale? I think they did Gale Force, and they did a euphonium solo with Robert Miller.
They didn't do a euphonium solo this go round, I don't think, but they did Gale Force, and then they did.
I think they did the same Tom feature as well.
Hymn of the Highlands. They did that.
Okay.
But it was they had experience kind of coming up with the concept and doing that like brass and concert style situation. And then the other bands, you could tell, hadn't necessarily messed with that too much. And so either they mostly just sat and played very good concerts. Like no one played poor. Like everybody did a really nice job. So I mean that was kind of my vibe. And if they did have a theming, it was like kind of grasping at straws a little bit, or it would be a very vague theme that they could just kind of do a little bit of anything with. But it's a new concept to that area of doing something like that.
Yeah.
But everybody had a march. That was the big thing. Everybody, even if they didn't compete in the march contest, everybody had a march, and the marches were really good. And all the pieces, it was nice because almost everybody did some like one thicker piece, and then everybody would do some sort of like entertainment-y thingy. And it seems like the bands that were most successful with that, and I noticed this with brass and concert as well when it comes to entertainment, is when you're featured solo or section solo or whatever, solely, is your like most entertaining thing, like your biggest pops piece, it tends to go over extremely well. Like I love that we had a bass section. I can't remember which band did it. I'm going to look it up here in a second. But one bass section came up to the front and played Never Had a Friend Like Me from Aladdin. So you had all four basses, do 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 do, and that was brilliant. And they came up front. It was awesome. It was great.
There was a band at the U.S. Open that did the Leroy Anderson typewriter, and they had a couple of players up in the front that were doing a solo thing, but the band was sitting in two rows straight across the front of it, and they did this kind of leaning thing, and they would all go like it was the most hilarious thing I've ever seen a brass band do. It was very effective and very very subtle. But it's kind of funny how you look at something like this and say, what is entertainment? What is entertaining?
It's hard. It's surprisingly hard to think about that.
It's kind of a little bit like porn. It's like, I don't know what, you know it when you see it. That old definition that they gave for that back in the 60s, with or the 70s. But I just know it when I see it. And it was that way. But the thing that tied all of it together was that they had to play really well. Mm-hmm. Whatever approach that they took to putting a program together, if they didn't execute it well, it just wouldn't have been entertaining at all. Yeah. So it kind of, you're on the leaders of the groups when they put these programs together to come up with something that's interesting, that when played well, would stack up against the audiences, what they're looking to hear.
We also had a lot of Salvation Army brass bands, so that kind of music as well, which I really enjoy. And I was surprised. I don't know why. I didn't realize it was such a thing in Canada as well as in American things. So I kind of want to know more about it. Like, is it a Britain thing, a British thing as well, or is it?
You talking about the Salvation Army bands?
Right.
Yeah, the Salvation Army was founded in London, and and quickly adopted Salvation, brass bands and singing as their their musical outlet for ministry. So the whole Salvation Army brass band thing did come from England, and of course Canada being in the Commonwealth, they would have a fair number of Salvation Army bands there. If you want to check out a lot of information about that, seek out Ron Holtz's books on the Salvation Army brass banding in the United States. He wrote, yeah, he's the expert on that, and we've had him on the podcast before as well.
We had him for a double, and he was just like, double. It was just like, just let the man talk, because it's just like constant information that I just want to soak up.
He was my MD at Lexington Brass Band, so I love him. I think he's in Atlanta now.
He's in Atlanta now, and retired. He's forgotten more about brass bands than any of us will ever know. It's just, he was, when I was in the Lexington Brass Band, he was the music director there as well. That was back in the early days of the LBB, and at that time I didn't really know how big Ron Holtz was, but when I started playing with the band, but I learned over the years that there's no limit to the number of things that guy has produced or could produce. So he's definitely one of our big legendary brass band personalities.
So it was Hannaford Youth was who did Friend Like Me, by the way, just putting that information out there. I ran all the way to go get my program to find that out.
Your camera followed you too.
It does that. Yeah, it'll do that.
That's pretty stalkerish there.
Well, if I had anything worth anything, I'd be worried about it. What was also really interesting is there was a lot of, there were 8 bands, but there was no shortage of like one person who might be in like 3 to 4 of those groups. Like there was a couple people, like I think one woman, her name was Anita. She placed in the horn solo competition on Friday, and then played with like 2 bands on Saturday and directed a band on Saturday. Right. And just like was running this gauntlet of sorts all around. Rob Miller was all over the place. And of course, you had like emergency subs for certain situations. There was one gentleman, I think his name was Alex, on B flat bass, and it was interesting. I was like, man, every single time there's a fat, like sounding bass section, this guy's back there. I think he's like secretly extreme, because he's just like very nice Canadian. I like Toronto Maple Leafs kind of dude. And then he, like, every single bass section he was in, it was like, woof. And I was like, I would think you're secretly extremely good at your instrument, my guy. Because like every single, if I was hearing like fat pedals, I was like, there's one thing in common every single time. So that was neat. And you would have these varying levels of bands having, players intermingled across all the way around. Which would make things, and you would have influences like, of course, the Mississauga Temple Band, because Rob is involved with them. They had a pretty entertaining program as well. They didn't do as much of like the standing up and staging, but they kind of knew how to program for this thing, because Rob's involvement with Weston Silver.
Did the Salvation Army bands that play there play a traditional Salvation Army repertoire, or did they play secular repertoire for this?
A little column A, column B. It would be mostly, like, if I'm looking at the Temple Band right now, Let There Be Light. Then they also had their own march in there as well. But then they also did the California Dreamin', like as an entertainment song. So like it was a little, like, of course, like their more brass bandy pieces were probably more from Salvation Army books, but that's also not uncommon for non-Salvation Army bands to just be playing Salvation Army associated literature anyway.
Oh yeah, for sure. The Salvation Army bands don't compete. It's kind of not in the mission for them. So you won't see a Salvation Army compete, which is probably, if they had several Salvation Army bands, the big reason why it wasn't a competition for the festival there. It's better to have bands participating, in the form of the way that they can participate, rather than just making a competition.
They still wore their uniforms as well, which Just throwing that out there. I did enjoy the one of them played their march, which I thought was interesting. I thought went really well. They just you could tell that there was some music they played that they played for a long time, traditional type stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who would you guys have put out there as the most entertaining or the best band that you heard of the day?
I mean, if you look at the awards, I think it's pretty easy to tell because Weston Silver came in and just played extremely well. And they also were the ones who did the most entertaining or the most entertainment esque things with staging and but also the selections. You know, everybody and it's what it is. It's a first contest. It's the first time they're ever doing something like this. So bands that had never been involved in something like this just put on really nice concerts. And entertainment contests are just like like you do that and a little bit of this and that, like there was a band that played When Thunder Calls, the Paul Levitt Cooper, but did not do the directed staging at all. They just sat in the box and played, and that piece is specifically written to not do that. And it was hurtful to the overall. So yeah, not to say that I don't know, Weston Silver came in and just was like, yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good band. I mean, they were really good at the U.S. Open as well. Amy left us.
Who won the U.S. Open this year?
Five Lakes Silver Band. They also won the NABA championship as well. So they're having a spectacularly good year.
One thing I was wondering about the staging for this festival, because I've noticed with the US Open, staging has been going through like a transition where it used to be bands were all over the stage, like shifting back and forth constantly. And I think at the US Open, the bands are starting to like settle down, which I like, being low brass. I don't like running around the stage constantly.
Yeah, I think it goes in waves. There was a time where, bands were dressing up in costumes and, doing all sorts of crazy things thematically, to say this is entertainment. And I think they've gone away from that too, because just because you put costumes on doesn't necessarily mean it's entertaining. It's not a given for that. And just because you change your location on the stage doesn't mean it's entertaining. It all has to be musically motivated. And I think it depends on the repertoire that you select or the creativity of what you do with it. I think that's the interesting thing about entertainment contests is that there's more of a blank slate for you to do something creative. And I do think logistics plays a big part in it. When you play at an entertainment contest on a stage that you don't get to rehearse on, it's very difficult to know whether or not you can actually pull off. I mean, imagine if your stage were 3 feet or 4 feet less wide than what you're used to rehearsing on, and then you run in and you boom, oh, you're in the wall or you're off stage or something. It's like, I think you have to be careful with the environment that you're in, and if you're going to do some crazy, outlandish things with your placement on the stage.
The last time I did the U.S. Open was with Dublin Silver with Tim Jameson, and he actually got the size of the stage and he planned everything out. And I'm telling y'all, we legit marched in that show. It was about Star Wars or something. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, there was a time when the drum corps influence on brass bands in America influenced the entertainment contest quite a bit. I remember a friend of mine playing in Fountain City when they did the U.S. Open, and he was in Kansas, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, we have a 4-hour choreography rehearsal. And I was like, say what?
Yeah, DSB has charts. It's like a miniature of like marching band, so everyone can see this is the shape we're doing here, and we all have our numbers, where we are, and so I can imagine a few years ago when it was much more drum corps oriented, how far that could have gone. And he measured the stage and tapes it out in the rehearsal space so you can know exactly how big it is and where the offstage area is and everything.
Shout out, Tim.
Yeah, shout out Tim.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can't let any detail go unnoticed when you do a competition like this. If you want to be successful, the margins are so small. You can't leave anything out.
Yeah, but to like answer the question, I guess so. Most bands set up like what you would expect from typical brass band situation. What I will say is there was two things that definitely led to more band success, and I don't know if Rachel noticed this too, but bands that were willing to play with the directional brass a little bit more. So bands that were willing to have cornets point out or trombones point out at any given point or anything like that, they that tended to end up with more success because they got to play dynamically different than they needed to. For instance, Weston Silver, there's that hymn, there's that chorale inside of Hymn of the Highlands where trombones and cornets are muted, cut mutes, and they stood up and pointed out. So that way the musicians got to play pretty comfortably, didn't have to play super super quiet, but the audience got everything right, and so
Yeah, that's interesting.
it went over so well. It like literally like had a pick job. It sounded so pretty. But then also the bands that were not nervous to like there were a lot of bands that like however the stage crew set them up, that's how they sat. And then there were other bands that came in and completely undid that entire thing and made sure that they set up as close to home as humanly possible. And those bands also saw some more success. There were definitely bands who were set up way because those stage crews are going to set you up big on purpose. They're going so that you have room to squish in a little bit. And some of the bands just didn't. They stayed really wide. And most of us rehearse in situations where like I'm sitting on the lap of the second euphonium player. And so if you're not used to that, if you're not used to that wideness, especially in a place like NABA, right, where you're in an actual concert hall, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to hear things that you didn't hear. And so that staging was noticeable.
So you think the bands that were farther apart did better, or bands that were closer together did better?
The bands that adjusted to what they were used to did better.
Okay.
So there are two. Would you say there are two professional brass bands in America? So I guess Battle Creek, and then the one in Pittsburgh. The name
River City.
River City.
Are they the only two?
I mean, no. I think Brian Meixner started a band in Greensboro called the North Carolina Brass Band. That's a professional band as well. It doesn't work nearly as much as River City, but it's patterned after River City since Brian played there for a while. But they're definitely paid. It's definitely a pro group. Other than that, I can't think of any that are pro. I mean, unless you count Fountain City. Yeah, you know, the Army Brass Band, which doesn't exist anymore, was definitely, I would say, that was a pro group. But that would probably be it. And not only that, but other than maybe the British Army brass bands, there might not be very many pro brass bands in the world.
I mean, there's brass bands that have enough money that they give stipends for lots of things that the bands do, but
I guess Athena brass band would be one too. Like,
well, it's pro level, but I mean, we aren't paid.
Well, we're given some, like if there's a conference, maybe free housing. We certainly weren't giving free housing at Midwest last year. Oh, by the way, Amy played wonderfully with Athena Brass Band at Midwest last year.
Thank
you.
You
duet.
Did you just have a concert like a couple days ago?
Yeah. I was in Louisville and I got home, and now I'm heading out to New Jersey for something and then going straight to iTech. So it's kind of like come home, do my laundry, repack, head back out. Yeah, but we played Anita Cocker Hunt was our conductor for this one. Jessica used up too many of her personal days. So
it's also a really bad time of the year for educators right now. Too.
Really, yeah. And we went to a wonderful I don't know what to call it. farm, like nature preserve, explantation type situation, and it was beautiful. We played on the lawn. We rehearsed in the library, which made me want to put on a ball gown and climb up on a library ladder and sing some big Disney number, because it was just beautiful, and I just love old libraries. So I got to be in an old library for like the majority of my day for 2 days. So it was awesome. um, but yeah, we had a great time. We brought a lot of new people into the fold of into Athena, gave a lot of people some new experiences, and played a great show. So yeah, that's my report. Now off to iTech.
I think one of my favorite Athena brass band experiences was the Gettysburg uh, Brass Band Festival, I think it's called. What an interesting place, with all the cannons and Civil War stuff.
I love playing at Gettysburg too. I think the brass band festival there is wonderful. It's just so the environment is so peaceful and beautiful, and you have a great audience. It's very appreciative, and this little hill that everyone can sit on in the shade, and they frequently have like an instrument petting zoo so kids can check out instruments, and it's just great. It's a wonderful afternoon of brass band stuff. I love it.
Yeah. Well, Gettysburg um, is a fascinating place for just for American history because of the
Right.
Civil War battle that was held there. I remember one time I was traveling through there and just going from Rochester back to North Carolina, and we ended up hitting Gettysburg, driving right past it, like a rat, like towards the end of the day. So we said, let's just go and see and drive around it and see what's there. And we get there and we were there like essentially as the sun's going down. And there was not a cloud in the sky, as much light as the sun can produce. And as it's orange as it's setting down, and you're just looking across the battlefield. And it was pretty hauntingly beautiful, knowing what happened and occurred there. The grounds there are just spectacular. So to have a brass band festival there I think is really, really cool.
And the seminary where it takes place is a Lutheran seminary, and that seminary was actually part of the battle.
In the battle.
So
yeah.
you are essentially on, part of the battlefield for
Yeah.
the performance. I love it. I would love to go back. Whether it's with Athena or subbing with Atlantic or with Dublin Silver or anyone, please ask me to come back in some form. There we go.
So is there anything else you guys want to talk about with the Canadian festival?
Toronto's really pretty. I really like Toronto a lot. Them's my people.
I could have seen, like, when my husband and I were getting ready to move. I think if I weren't a certified teacher in obviously the U.S., and my husband wasn't admitted to the bar in the U.S., I could have seen Toronto becoming like a thing, because I'm originally from Ohio, so Toronto is not that far away. But I think sometimes you get stuck in some of those things, of crossing that border. But Toronto is beautiful.
It was much nicer. I was there in January, and it was miserably cold for me for the Texan that I am. But this time around, it was gorgeous. The flowers, remember that, Aaron? We did a walk once, and there was just all these beautiful flowers everywhere.
Oh, so they put us on a hotel that was, for all intents and purposes, a little far from the venue. But I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed being in a walkable city for a minute. So I walked to and from the hotel every single time, even when offered car rides. And I really want to see it in like October, November, because it's weird. If I was going to equate it to anything in terms of like the architecture of University of Toronto and kind of the surrounding area where the event was taking place, it's very similar to like, obviously it's a metropolitan area, but it's also very similar to like the Duke campus and like the way that like cathedral, very dark building kind of
I can see
thing.
that.
Yeah, it was kind of along those lines. But there's a park right beside it. Food was like there was food and pub readily available, like in the general area. You know, the important things of the brass conference. The hall was really good. The recital hall was, everything sounded great. So it's a great spot for it. Thank goodness, they were cornet players and not trumpet players, because I don't think that little exhibition hallway would have been able to handle squeeing quite so much, because there was no carpet involved. It was all brick. So thank goodness we weren't getting in there at 8 a.m. and people, were trying to pop off quadruple C's. So that was nice.
Wow.
But yeah, I genuinely, it was a phenomenal. I would, because I jokingly, like, when shaking Anita's hand on my way out, was like, well, now you gotta do it. You can't not do this anymore, because it went off so well. And I would highly encourage, especially if you're a band up, closer to the border, I would highly suggest making your way out there if you have the opportunity to. It was a very nice day.
Definitely beautiful surroundings. And can we give a shout out to Gary Curtin? I had never heard this man play, heard about him. Oh my goodness. He played Alan Vizzudi's Carnival of Venus. I didn't even think that was possible. It's not even possible on trumpet, let alone euphonium. And I was completely blown away by his musicianship. I had no idea. I'd never heard of him, and now I'm a huge fan.
He almost played as pretty as his euphonium looks. They were almost.
Wow, that's saying a lot. Well, must be a pretty euphonium.
It is. I told him he needs to get, because it has, like, jokingly what I call tribal tattoos on it, and I told him he needs to get a sleeve of the same tattoos that he has on his euphonium. He didn't think that was as good of an idea, but what am I? Hey, Rachel, before we let you go and wrap up here, aren't you doing like a brass residency type thing coming up soon?
Yeah, later in August 9th through the 13th, we'll be playing at the Prairie Music Residency it's in the University of Saskatchewan. I'm flying into Saskatoon. So it's in there somewhere. And but I'm really excited I will be doing like 3 solos with the brass band there. And the conductor is Joe Parisi, who I used to work in Fountain City.
Wow.
Actually, I'm having a phone call with him today at 12, because I sent him the music that I wanted to play, the solos, and he's like, we need to talk. I've got some ideas. So I'll just see.
Somebody got called to the principal's office.
So, but he already told me to listen to one, Peter Meacham's Apex. It's a beautiful piece, but he's got other ideas. So I'm always up for listening to learning new rep. But I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm checking out the website. It looks great. Yeah, it says guest conductor, Dr. Joe Parisi, guest percussion directors, Dr. Annie Stevens and Dr. Andrea Vennett. And 2023 guest soloist, Raquel Samayoa. Looks like it's going to be a great time.
Yeah.
More guest tutors to be announced.
Ooh.
There's more. Yeah, that looks spectacular.
What do you need more for? You have Rachel. You don't need any more. You have all the guests you need.
I was thinking 1 or 2 solos. When they told me 3, maybe an encore, I was like, oh, I have to rethink this.
You just said there might be an encore. Now you're stuck. Somebody will listen to this and they'll be there and be like, she said she's got an encore. She's doing it.
Adam just did the same thing for me with IET. He was like, hey, what are you playing for the recital? I was like, excuse me? Recital. And I was like, I'm conducting a group. And he's like, no, you're playing on a recital. I'm playing the opening recital. I'm the opening of the opening. I'm like, oh, I can't suck then. The first notes all these high school kids are going to hear. All right, so question of the day. Since we're talking about an international brass band conference, I thought it'd be fun to question, what is your favorite location that you've visited because of brass band? So it could be for a performance or, adjudication or something like that. To start it off myself, this sounds silly, but I really enjoyed going to Virginia Beach with the JMU brass band. I had been to I've been to Virginia Beach a bunch of times. We did it for Virginia Music Education Association. We did a thing, but going with the brass band and going in the middle of winter to a beach was really neat. And normally it's so touristy and packed. It was actually really nice to see the boardwalk with just no one there and just like exist there, and just it was cool. And even though I live in Florida, I don't visit beaches very often, so that was nice. So that was my favorite.
Virginia Beach is awesome.
It can be. I'll take Outer Banks any day though.
Yeah, most of my times at Virginia Beach have been on the water side, out on boats there, where you can. I've actually seen a whale out there, which was pretty cool. I've got a pretty cool video of it.
What about you, Amy? I have a feeling we all know at least what country yours is going to be in.
Yeah, probably is going to be her first brass band ever playing with a brass band with Black Dyke.
No, I was looking up some stuff. No, you got the country right. I'm kind of, yeah. I think I'm gonna go with Lanarkos Priory. And then
you told us about that. Yeah.
That was because I mean, like I could say like a really cool like hall. I've played in some cool halls. But lots of people have played in cool halls. I think that Lanarkos was one of my favorites because I'm a huge like British history nerd. I listen to the British History podcast and like read. I just so going to a priory that was founded. I just looked it up in 1169.
An old building.
Yeah. Very, very old. And I got to be a guest soloist. Well, not a guest soloist. I was a soloist within the band, playing with Besses of the Barn. So one of the oldest brass bands in existence, playing in a priory that is so old. And I played Michelangelo. And the acoustics in that place were just beautiful, just gorgeous. It was one of those times and you have to like just focus, keep playing, because sometimes like you're playing like, oh, it's so pretty, oh crap, I need to play now. So that was that. I think that's mine. Next.
Yeah, mine isn't nearly as special as that, but it's still, from brass band land. It's the going to Royal Albert Hall and watching the national finals in that venue. It's like going back to the motherland, and we're the premier brass band event in the world.
What year was that? Do you know?
I think it was 2018.
I thought you were like 18 what? What, excuse me?
It was 18. It was 18.
I believe the year was 1862.
Yeah, 2018. They Kenneth Downey's "Handle in the Band" was the test piece. And I sat there and literally listened to 20 of those in a row. I didn't miss a single one. And I had a score. And the first time I heard it, I was like, I don't know about this. But after you listen to it 20 times, I was like, wow, this is a fantastic piece of music, and played so well by so many bands. So it was, that was a pretty cool experience. I like that. All right, last one up, Rachel's turn.
Yep.
It was one of the it was the year I went with Fountain City to Brass in Concert, but we had a free day in Edinburgh, and I think we actually played there, Scotland, and I think that was the coolest place. Just walking around the cobblestones and seeing all the castles, going to pubs. It was a pretty cool experience.
I used to travel up to Edinburgh on the weekend sometimes, just like grab a train and go up. And there's a youth hostel that was like, the building is from like the 1200s. And there's a youth hostel like right downtown, and I was like a frequent flyer to the youth hostel. Just go up. And there's the statue of Abraham Lincoln there's a cemetery that overlooks the city, and there's a statue of Lincoln right. It's the same cemetery as David Hume. So I would go at like right as the sun's coming up and go to that cemetery that overlooks the city and just watch the sun come up over because it's if you haven't been to the city, it's like the old part of the city is all like the same colored stone.
Yeah.
And so sunrises and sunsets look really pretty. So
why
I would
do
go
they
there
have a statue of Abraham Lincoln?
because it was during the Civil War. Because they were going through like their Great Depression while we were in our Civil War.
Okay.
So from what I was told, this might not be totally exactly historically accurate, so nobody get mad at me. But from what I was told, when the North couldn't buy cotton from the South, they began buying textiles from Great Britain. And so if they're in the middle of their Great Depression, they kind of formed that alliance that helped them kind of get through that. So they really like Abraham Lincoln over there.
Because he bought a lot of T-shirts.
Yeah, that's so. But it was nice to have the statue of Abraham Lincoln because sometimes when I was homesick, it was nice. There were a few in Manchester too that I would visit.
That's fascinating.
All right, so viewers, listeners, please help me out down the line and submit a question that you would like to hear from any of us. It doesn't necessarily have to be a favorite or anything like that. Also, if you're listening to this thing and you're not subscribed on whatever platform it is, push the button. It helps. Helps me know what's going on with all these sorts of things. But Rachel, thanks so much for coming on and hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on. I had a great time. Thank you.
You don't have to lie to us.
I tell no lies, I promise.